All right, this is Shem the Pen, exclusive for the Keystone Statement. We're going to do some record reviews today. Now, I'll tell you what, I could go through every one of these and yap about them, but I picked out 5 records to just give you a little information about, and maybe every week or so I'll pick out 5 more. And here's a good one to start. This is a really interesting one. This is the Gravediggaz, the pick, the sickle, and the shovel. Now, this was the second Gravediggaz album. The first one was produced by Prince Paul, who also produced De La Soul, and really one of the best all-time, most creative hip-hop producers, and one of the great skit guys, sample-wise. Sort of the death of sampling kind of ruined his sound a little bit. But the first Gravediggaz album was known as horrorcore, or at least that was like what the media called it, which was terrible. I mean, if you think like a little bit like Insane Clown Posse, you know what I mean? Like just over the top. Or I'll tell you what, Natural Born Killers, the Dr. Dre and Ice Cube song, was around the time of horrorcore. It just was a awful trend in hip-hop for a while that is thankfully mostly forgotten. But this second album was the RZA from the Wu sort of picked up the direction, and he completely changed it. He said, no, this is not horrorcore. I'm going to bring the wisdom of the Wu-Tang to Gravediggaz, because the W is the wisdom of the universe. And his trip was, the Gravediggaz are here to dig the graves of the mentally dead. You know, that's what they talk about on the intro. That's this album. These songs are, as far as RZA's side project, I think this is as deep as he ever got. And what I mean by that is his, philosophy and social commentary and conspiracy theories and all the good stuff you want from the Wu-Tang. This was, I think, right after Wu-Tang Forever. This is peak Wu material, and it should not be forgotten. This is, if you like the Wu, you got to check out this whole thing. Dangerous Minds. One of the rappers is called Too Poetic, and is sort of a sad story that he died very young, maybe a year or two after this album. And especially on this album, it's a tremendous performance. You go, and even if you don't listen to it, go look up his verse on Dangerous Minds. It's one of the best verses in rap that I know. I know a lot of rap. It's a tremendous verse. Unexplained, samples Chicago. That's pretty cool. I would recommend, of all these tracks, What's Going On is peak weirdness of RZA and his conspiracies and his it's beautiful. That's what we're here for. We don't want this album is not for the common people. This is, if you're the mentally dead, this album's gonna dig your grave. The Gravediggaz. It's a classic. Now, next up, you should know this one. This is Bob Dylan, Blonde on Blonde. This is known as peak Dylan. This is generally accepted as the best Bob Dylan album ever released. And 1966. And so why is that? Well, it's musically, this is the best he ever did. Because I can understand people don't like Bob Dylan musically. Or you just don't get it. I understand that, because his early folk stuff was, I love Dylan, but his early folk stuff was a little bit derivative. His past 20 years, he's sort of just done like 12-bar blues kind of stuff, which I hate. Is just an absolute, so creatively bankrupt. That's that stuff that just does like 3 lines and then the next line's different. It's like the kind of music like Bruce Willis would sing at a family gathering, and and think he's hip. No, it's not. But Blonde on Blonde, this is a double album, and this is all of some of Dylan's best, most memorable tunes. Visions of Joanna, Just Like a Woman, Stuck Inside a Mobile. I think the most interesting song on here is Fourth Time Around, which is a parody and a diss song to the Beatles, to John Lennon, which was because Lennon sort of picked up Dylan's style. The Beatles were doing, She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand, and they met Dylan, and Dylan got big, and suddenly they're doing, Norwegian Wood and You Got to Hide Your Love Away. And it's not to take away anything. I mean, they didn't copy him. They took him as an influence. They recognized him as as somebody who mattered and was important, So it's not a bad thing, but Dylan, at least in a sort of professional rivalry sort of way, parodied the song Norwegian Wood, the John Lennon song, which was about a one-night stand with a broad who sort of takes control and says, okay, now we're going to go to bed. Now I got to get up for work, so go sleep in the bathtub. And Dylan's song is sort of the same sort of thing, a one-night stand, and nothing really happens. He leaves, he realizes he forgot his coat, and he gives her a piece of gum. And for all the deep Dylan lyrics, it's noticeably shallow. And plus, it noticeably kind of rips off the melody of Norwegian Wood. Why it's called Fourth Time Around. It's saying, you stole my shit, now I'm going to steal your shit. How many times are we going to go around on this? And the last line then gets a little serious and it says, I never asked for your crutch, now don't ask for mine. Which is saying, I didn't try to copy your shit, so ease up on biting my stuff, He's basically saying you don't want to be the next contestant on the Summer Jam screen, John Lennon, because Bob Dylan he wrote some great diss songs in this period. Positively 4th Street, Can You Please Crawl Out Your Window. This is just a tremendous album, and it's very listenable if you don't like Bob Dylan, melody-wise, songwriting-wise, re-listenably wise. It holds up. It's one of those that deserves its spot as a classic. I listen to it all the time. It's a great, summer album to me. All right, what do we got? Oh, okay, we've got Beck, Odelay. Now, this is produced by the Dust Brothers, who produced Paul's Boutique. Probably sample-wise, the most complex and really the best hip-hop album ever produced, sample-wise and creative. And like Prince Paul, they were sort of victims of the death of sampling, where people started getting sued, and you couldn't just, Paul's Boutique takes from the Beatles and Steve Miller Band and the Eagles, and you could never do that today. But then Beck, this was his second big album after his debut, and this was really a big awaited album that you knew this was going to be cool, or you hoped it was going to be cool. Because you have the Dust Brothers and Beck, and it lived up to. It's a hip album, but I will tell you that I blame this album. I've kind of cooled off on Beck a little bit over the years. This is it's sort of, the 90s. There's a lot of those sort of hipster. There'd be kind of a hip hop beat and some ironic dude who's has sort of poetic lyrics, and that's a 90s thing that happened, and I blame this album a little bit for that. Devil's Haircut, New Pollution, we get it, you're doing, hipster hop, you might call it, but I guess it doesn't take away that this is a great album, and Jackass is a great tune, which I'm pretty sure samples a cover of It's All Over Baby Blue, the Bob Dylan song, It's one of my favorite Dylan tunes. The Dead play it tremendously. I'm pretty sure when the Grateful Dead played that song, that was a sort of sign that they were tripping on acid. Or, yeah, of course they were. Ramshackle is great. But this is one of those albums that it's kind of hard to listen to now. It's a little bit like Radiohead, that their sound got kind of ripped off, or Pearl Jam, their sound got ripped off. A lot of these 90s bands, there were so many people that copied them and watered it down and pussified it and just commercialized it, that the original stuff doesn't even hold up as much. It got sort of muddied by that. But it's still a good record, and it's still, production-wise, it's bizarre. You have that Dust Brothers weirdness to it. Then we have Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. Weasels Rip My Flesh. This album just celebrated a birthday yesterday. 8/10/1970 this thing came out. This was, I think, after the Mothers broke up. The Mothers of Invention were a bunch of weird, just ragtag dudes who Zappa somehow turned into a genius band. You know, they weren't like virtuosos, really. Some of them were. But this is an example of just Zappa's genius. And this, I think, album more than any other will give you the genius of Frank Zappa, because this is probably his weirdest album, but I'd say it's his most accessible. The weirdness makes sense, and it's listenable, and it's not weird for the sake of being weird. It all connects together. And I'll give you an example. This has some of my favorite moments, not only in Zappa's music, but in all music. You have the first song, Did You Get Any Anya, is just absolute insanity. It's like weird voices, and the guitars and instruments are playing in different time signatures, and it's just like over the top bizarre. And this is one of those albums I prefer the CD version, I think, because Did You Get Any Anya is like 2 minutes longer in the CD version. But right when you can't get any weirder, it goes into Directly From My Heart to You, like a picture-perfect blues, hard rock blues cover with Jean-Luc Ponty on that, electric violin, whatever the hell he played. Like almost like it's sort of like a Derek and the Dominoes, sort of just classy, picture perfect hard blues. And you get in the first two songs this dichotomy of weirdness and classy, classic hard rock. And then we get later on, we have, of course, My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama, a great Zappa tune. And then Oh No into Orange County Lumber Truck. For the Zappa fans, you know that's one of the great moments in Frank Zappa music. Both songs, some of his best melodies. Oh No, what is Oh No about? I wish I could explain that without really getting off on a Zappa tangent. Frank Zappa was, in a weird way, one of the most cynical, sort of, but also one of the most humane and thoughtful rock musicians you'll ever listen to. In that, he was he was not into the sort of the hippie culture, but that doesn't mean that he was like a conservative or that he even looked down. He just was such an individual. And I think the greatest Frank Zappa story, at least for now, for our culture, is that Matt Groening, who created The Simpsons, was a huge Frank Zappa fan. And towards the end, he actually spent some time with Frank, towards the end of Frank's life. and sort of sat at the feet of, one of his great heroes. And he said he was watching a speech by Dan Quayle, the idiot vice president. And Dan Quayle was getting shit on and made fun of, and he made this speech where he tried to be tough, and he said, I'm going to take all this scorn and ridicule you give me, and I'm going to wear it as a badge of honor. And Matt Groening said, you know what? Scorn and ridicule, that's what I want to do. That's what Frank did, and that's what I'm going to do. And that's what the Simpsons did. I mean, and that's maybe the best kind of, or not the best, but it's one of my favorite sort of cultural criticisms. Scorn and ridicule, So God bless Frank and Matt Groening. But there's a connection there, and we can thank Frank Zappa for The Simpsons. How about that? So the last one, 2,500 Red Cross fans can't be wrong. And this is number 2424. Red Cross it's one of my favorite bands. These guys are like, they started out kind of like a joke, glam punk band. They had a song called Linda Blair, and they referenced a lot of like goofy pop culture stuff. I think they covered a Charles Manson song, which is actually kind of a lame thing to do. I don't approve of that. It's not cool to cover Charles Manson, sorry. But they're a mix of, I'd say there's some Beatles influence, there's some New York Dolls, there's some Kiss, but this came out as really at their peak, and it really not only has some of their best tunes, but it has some tunes you can't get anywhere else, including Birds and Fleas, probably my favorite Red Cross song. I've made some, over the years, mixes of Red Cross. I almost always start off with Birds and Fleas. I love that song. Huge Wonder, which rips off a riff from Black Sabbath from the end of War Pigs. The Red Crosses, they're fun. They're a little bit maybe like Ween, but they're sort of aware of their own goofiness, or they started out goofy and then realized, hey, we're a pretty good band, and they are good. Hey, 2,500 Red Cross fans can't be wrong. Of course, that's from an Elvis album. So there you go. If you're going to listen to some tunes, Birds and Fleas, I'd say Oh No. I'd say Lord Only Knows. I'd say, actually on the Dylan, I would recommend the song Temporary Like Achilles. It's sort of a honky-tonk piano song, and a lot of the Blonde on Blonde is about relationships, and it's about he goes to meet this girl, and her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend is upset. Achilles is in the alleyway. He doesn't want me here. Yes, he does brag. And it's sort of saying temporary like Achilles. All these girls' boyfriends are temporary. But it's the one I recommend. Gravediggaz, I recommend either Dangerous Minds or What's Going On. Probably Dangerous Minds, just because it's Poetic's verse is so good. But there you go. There's 5 albums for you, and I'll be back again sometime, barring any unforeseen circumstances. So, thanks for watching.